Okay. Hi, Janelle. How are you?
Hi, Douglas. I'm well. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Oh, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. So I see your book cover in the background there, Poems from the Asylum. And this is the story of a woman named Martha Nash.
Martha Nash. She's actually my great grandmother.
I was going to ask that. You presumpted me just a little bit. I was going to ask you if she was a relative of yours, your great grandmother. Okay.
I never actually met her, so I definitely had to use the wisdom of my mother, who was writing about her grandmother. So it's a little bit of a team effort, me and my mother working together to tell Martha's story.
Oh, well, that's great. I think that's wonderful. Mother-daughter bonding moment over that. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
So this is an interesting topic because it's something that I'm always a bit fascinated with. I always found that the scariest movies were the ones that took place in mental institutions and asylums, particularly back in the old days when they were brutal by today's standards, and I think by anyone's standards. We'll get into that in a second. I just want to do a little bit of a backstory on you. Now, you've written other books. It says you're an award-winning author. You're a journalist. So, what type of other writing have you done before you did this one?
Well, I used to be a news journalist for six different newspapers, and I would write the profile pieces about amazing people in the city, in the state. And I also wrote a memoir about an adoption experience that I had, adopting my own child, and that was the award winner. So, very proud of that. And I'm in the process of writing another story that deals a little bit more with those underdog characters I seem to be drawn toward, who rode along the Oregon Trail in 1864 in a wheelchair as a woman. So, really just focusing on the social injustice and righting the wrong and letting the underdog come out on top. So, those are the stories that I've really enjoyed writing.
I think those are the stories that a lot of people like, especially in the United States. We always root for the underdogs. And
Right.
yeah, it's in our nature to do that. I think that was, I don't know, something in our American spirit that yes, you can overcome adversity and you can rise and be successful. And there's plenty of those stories here. And I think we have the opportunity here, probably more than a lot of other places.
Something I noticed in this process of writing nonfiction was, particularly in my great grandmother's case, Martha, she tried to advocate for herself in the 1920s and 30s. But as a woman, her story could not be told. It didn't get out and get interpreted appropriately. So, one of the things I want to sort of correct or right or adjust is that for those people that didn't have the voice, I can give them the voice. So that's one of my favorite things to do in that underdog story is to allow them to tell their own narrative without it being hushed or pushed aside, or as I've run into in many ways, Douglas, with writing about women in the Wild Wild West, is having the woman's experience be sort of overlaid with the male's version of it, and having the big cowboy male figures sort of dominate the narrative. And so we see that in both of the books that I've been working on, where in Martha's case, she went to the press and told them what initially got her into the asylum. And it was sort of covered up with or layered with her husband's perspective of things and how he and his interpretation based on societal guidelines of the time, that was the message that carried on. It was the male's perspective that carried on. So I hope that these types of projects that I'm working on help remove a little bit of that layer to just say, hey, let the woman speak for herself.
I did want to ask you a little bit about her story. I know that around the turn of the century, that there was a whole list of things that one could be incarcerated in a mental institution. And some of them were absolutely insane. Like I remember reading one that said if a woman reads too much was one of them, right?
Yeah, we can't ever get a little intellectual
Oh,
on us.
okay.
Yeah, there was ones, and to me, I just think this is ridiculous because the narrative was so male centric, male heavy. But you could be admitted into asylum for wanting to have sex too much or wanting to have sex not enough. So I laugh at things like this and I say, well, guys, which way do you want it? Like for the woman,
Uh,
she's darned if she does, she's darned if she doesn't. But yeah, heartbreak was a reason.
yes.
Maybe an alternative diet, just because you maybe are a picky eater or you want an adjusted diet, that would have been enough to say, that's really strange. We should have you committed.
I mean, aside from the other ones too, they used to lock up people for being homosexual. The list was just unbelievable, and some of them were just so ridiculous. What was your great grandmother put in there for? I assume she didn't go voluntarily, did she?
Oh, I cannot even imagine that. She had a procedure in 1927, and it's still a mystery to the family to this day. We have several suspicions because it's very secretive, so it might be something of the female nature. But after this procedure, she complained to her surgeon. She said, I'm having these symptoms in my mouth. I can't taste the food anymore. I can't use my tongue and swallow correctly. I can't really drink correctly anymore. And we have been able to pinpoint that towards some kind of lingual nerve damage that might be associated with intubation. And that was a new procedure at the time. There's no anesthesiologist to manage this. So the doctors don't know what this is. The doctors don't know why, if they operated in this other part of the body, there'd be these nerve damage issues in the mouth. And so, because the doctors don't know, she doesn't even know. Nobody knows what's going on in her mouth. She's declaring, I can't eat, I can't drink, I can't swallow, I can't taste. And yet there's not enough medical information to advise anyone about what to do next. So because it's a mystery and they don't know how to help her, it must be delusion, a lie. She's trying to get attention. But really, she was trying to advocate for herself, but there were no answers.
How long was she in the institution?
She was actually sentenced to 7 years. And that to me, that's baffling. I don't know how you can sentence someone like, oh, you are having trouble tasting food. That equals 7 years.
Yeah, I
I don't,
know. It's the idea should be they stay until they are deemed well.
right? That's logical. So she was there from 1928 until 1934, and she was actually paroled 6 months early from her sentence. And that we believe, and we fact checked this with the asylum staff and historians, we believe it has something to do with reforms starting to happen and overcrowding. And so, as a measure to reduce the overcrowding, they took patients out who were not a harm to themselves or anyone else and said, okay, you can go home. And it's sort of like how we have social workers check in on people now, but it's an outpatient deal. So she was released on that condition, but she still had to have medical supervision for another year in the home. So she, beyond that, we don't know when she would have gotten out. We do know that legally a male would have had to sign her out. And we do know that her husband perhaps wasn't too inclined to do that.
Was she subject to any of those horrible treatments that they had back then, electroshock, and I know they put people into insulin-induced comas, ice water baths, all kinds of horrible things.
Yeah, well, those were happening, and we have confirmed several of the procedures that were commonly used at the time. And she doesn't talk about them in her poetry very clearly. She does mention being in chains. She does mention being behind bars. She mentions being restrained to a board all day long, which we have confirmed the patients would be chained in their seat or even change all the way down to a bench. because there was not enough medical progress for perhaps manic or violent patients, or to be able to supervise them all. So they all received a little bit of a sedative or a little barbiturate, and they all sat in their chains and didn't go anywhere. But she did not mention electroshock or insulin shock. She didn't mention the Utica cribs, which we know for a fact there were 5 of them at that hospital. But she did mention being in isolation in a black, darkened room. So we have glimpses of it. She definitely, I would say she clearly mentions being force-fed or attempted to be force-fed. She denies that they were ever successful with it. So for that, I'm kind of like, go Granny.
So the book is a collection of poems that she actually wrote while incarcerated?
Yes. And initially, I would say they were all just missing her home and family, missing her little boy who was only 6 when she left. But over time, because it is a collection that spans about 5 years of her time in there, her poems become more focused on injustice or social issues. She talks about women and women's rights. She talks about other patients and she advocates for their release. She mentions one in specific where the woman was put in for some kind of a legitimate reason. And since then, her husband passed away. And she had 2 children that were now orphaned, not because of losing both parents, but because there was no male left to sign her out. She could never leave. So her children would become orphans because of the system.
It's so hard to imagine these days that back then, and this was just 100 years ago, that women were really treated as like akin to property. There really was not a lot of difference. Unimaginable for me when you think these days. I mean, because women and men are, I know there is still issues of inequity, but in terms of women's ability to do whatever they want to do, doctors, lawyers, judges, almost president of the United States, and the idea that just 100 years ago they were just nothing more than a plow animal almost.
Yeah. Yeah, I know she was trying to get some kind of a divorce or separation or just justify the situation in her marriage. And that was another thing she spoke out on or wrote about in her poetry, was that her husband was allegedly cheating on her. And so she tried to initiate a separation and say, hey, this isn't going to work. And he refused to acknowledge the cheating. And with that, she would not be legally able to get a divorce. So she's stuck with this guy who's going to continue to treat her any way that he feels fit. And so one of the things I think was interesting is that after her release, in a news media interview where she goes to the press and is still defending herself, saying, I still have these symptoms. No doctor cured me. I still am who I am. And in this, her husband says, well, I made sure to call because I didn't want people to think I was starving my wife. Because back then, you can abuse your wife in so many ways. You can cheat on her. You can leave her penniless. You can leave her homeless. But you can't neglect her. So that would have been reason for divorce. That would have been looked very poorly on him if that was proven to be true. So he defended himself, again, creating that male narrative to superimpose her point and her purpose for speaking out, to say, whoa, guys, I mean, I did cheat on her and put her in an insane asylum, but, I do try to feed her every once in a while.
Well, that was very nice of him. We've got just about a minute left. So how long did she live? How old was she before she passed away?
She actually lived until her 80s, and
Oh, okay.
unfortunately, she suffered from dementia. So she slipped away before she was gone. And she did leave sort of a questionable legacy in our family because of the stories that were created about her in that time. And we received the information and the stories passed on of, oh, my mom, from my grandpa, my mom, she was nuts. And now that we have the ability to look back and see what was a little bit more true, we can say, no, she wasn't. But for almost 100 years, that was the story that persisted. So I'm really happy. I would like to know her. I would like to meet her. But at least at this point, I'm happy that I got to know her in a little bit more of a correct way. And I think readers will enjoy that. They will enjoy seeing those superimposed narratives come off and being part of unlocking the mystery.
My guest is Janelle Molony, and the book is called Poems from the Asylum. Is it available now? Is it out?
Yeah, it's available worldwide.
Super. Could you give out your website, please?
Absolutely. My author website is janellemolony.com.
Okay. And there's information on the book and how to order and all that good stuff there, yeah?
Yes, absolutely. We're also on social media at 7 Years Insane.
7 Years Insane. Okay. Well, Janelle, thanks so much for coming on the show. It was nice meeting you. Best of luck with the